Hi,
because
Radian.
Radian is the coordinator of the master program in the postgraduate school. So actually, your visiting professor is by or under his program.
Good. Hi, Radian. Good to see you. You're muted.
Radian, you're still mute.
Yes. Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you. Are you both? You're both at home in different rooms?
Yes. So, for the semester already start in Austin or not yet?
Yeah, it started maybe 3 weeks ago, but today, all this week, in fact, we haven't had classes because there's a snowstorm. And there's no electricity, and some people don't have water. I have electricity, I'm okay, but some people don't have water, electricity, and so yeah, no classes at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so these are students who are going to be here.
Yes, the students are coming with us, but because of this is a public lecture, so we invite or we give opportunity for public to join our lecture.
Oh, great. And so do you know if we have people from the public who aren't students?
Yeah, but mostly our students, because we invite other university students, for example, like out of Java, from Sumatra, from Kalimantan, yes.
Oh, good. Well, this is great. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it. And thanks also for your report, which we received yesterday.
Yeah, if there is something that we need to be to revise, especially for the language, please let me know.
Yeah, we will let you know. We're gonna start reading them soon, and then we might have comments. But you're healthy, you're well, everything is going well for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? How are you doing?
Yeah,
fine?
Everything is okay. Yeah, staying safe and staying out of trouble and trying to do some work.
Still jogging?
I hurt my back actually, so I'm taking a bit of a break. Yeah, I had a back injury.
I'm so sorry for that.
But I'm okay. I'm okay now. But I wasn't able to. I haven't been able to run for a few weeks, which is unfortunate. But I'm getting better. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah.
You're welcome. So I think it's already 9 o'clock. Shall we have the participant to enter the Zoom, and we will start?
Great.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think that our director is here. Let me see. Oh, Richard, before I start, we have our vice director for the international partnership, Dr. Suparto Wijoyo. He is here.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Pak Parto, you are still mute.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, Prof. Richard Albert. How are you?
Good morning. Good to see you. Here it's evening, but it's. Yeah. I wish you a good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Pak Parto, Pak Director will coming or not?
Oh, halo.
Unmute Pak Parto.
Oke. Nah, Rosa, Pak Direktur,
yes.
hari ini sekarang sedang ceramah penerimaan mahasiswa baru pasca. maka dimulai saja, nanti penutupannya beliau hadir.
Okay, so Richard, as what we plan, actually the director will open your public lecture, but because of today is actually the day of the how do you say, admission, the student admission, the first student admission is today, so the director is still have a meeting with the rector, so maybe later on he will have the closing remark for your public lecture. Okay, so before I start, I want to see how many participant is already coming. Okay, I will start now. Good morning in Surabaya and good morning in good evening in Austin, Richard. Distinguished participant, dear senior, dear colleague, and friends, and dear students, welcome. My name is Rosa Ristawati. Today we have a very special agenda of public lecture by Professor Richard Albert. Professor Richard Albert is the William Stamps Ferris Professor in Law at the University of Texas at Austin. He has held visiting faculty appointment at Yale University, the University of Toronto, the Externado University of Columbia, and the Interdisciplinary Center Herzliya. And right now, Professor Richard Albert is our visiting professor at the postgraduate school Airlangga University. So he will conduct series of lecture as well as workshop, right, Richard? And today, the topic of his public lecture is about constitutionalism in the world. So this public lecture is presented by Master of Science program in Law and Development at the Postgraduate School University Airlangga or Universitas Airlangga. And Master of Science program in Law and Development is actually a unique master program offering a combination curriculum of law and other multidisciplinary area. So actually, our director will open the public lecture, but maybe to represent him, I would like to invite the coordinator of the Master of Science program in Law and Development, Dr. Radian Salman, to give a welcoming message for you, for all of you. Radian, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rosa. I think very short. Good evening, Professor Richard Albert there in Austin. Good morning here in Surabaya, distinguished participant, dear students, and also colleagues here in our webinar on constitutionalism. I would like to introduce myself. I am a coordinator program of Master of Science in Law and Development in Postgraduate School at University Airlangga. As Rosa already mentioned, that this program is a unique program here in Indonesia. One of the uniqueness is this is a multi-entry offering courses in combination with public law and also private law. And one of the issue in public law that always relevant is, of course, about constitution. So I think this is a great event to have a Professor Richard Albert here to talk about constitutionalism. And this webinar is part of our tradition to open a new semester for this year. So again, it is our honor to have you here, Professor Richard, and thank you for your willingness to have a collaboration with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Radian. So without further ado, I invite Professor Richard Albert to deliver his public lecture. Richard, the time is yours.
Well, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here today, especially given that I have a new association with Airlangga University as a visiting professor of law. It's a great honor for me. And I thank all of you for welcoming me into the Airlangga family. I want to thank, in particular, Professor Rosa and Professor Radian. I'd like to thank the director. This is really a great gift to me, and I'm so very grateful. And I think this is the beginning of an ongoing relationship that we will have together in the weeks and the months and the years ahead. I should say, however, that this is not my first time interacting with this great community at Airlangga. I came to visit you in November 2019, December 2019, to meet you and teach your students and have exchanges with your faculty. It was a wonderful visit hosted by Professors Rosa and Radian and hosted by the university. So I feel very comfortable and at home at Airlangga in Surabaya. And so I thank you all so very, very much. I want to invite you to come back with me to the year 1789. The US Constitution had just become official, and the new country had high hopes for itself and for the world. One of the authors of that new Constitution was Benjamin Franklin. He had doubts about whether the Constitution would endure. He wrote a letter to a friend in France to give an update on the new Constitution. And here is what Franklin wrote to his friend. Our new Constitution is now established, and it has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. Today, more than 2 centuries later, we know that Franklin had little reason to worry, because we can now speak of death, taxes, and the US Constitution as the 3 certainties of life. The US Constitution has defied all expectations about constitutional endurance. The average lifespan of a constitution is only 19 years, much younger than the age of the US Constitution. Today, the US Constitution continues to grow older with no real risk of being replaced anytime soon. But the endurance of the US Constitution is just a small part of the larger story of constitutionalism that history will tell about our time. Constitutionalism is everywhere. It informs how states behave in the international order, how governments treat their constituents, how communities order themselves, how groups relate to individuals, and how persons interact with each other. We see constitutionalism in global and regional governance, for example, the UN and the EU. We see constitutionalism in arts and education, for instance, at the Louvre or in any university in the world, including Airlangga University. And we see constitutionalism in sports, whether the Olympics, the Super Bowl, the World Cup. Constitutionalism is everywhere. All of these examples trace a common lineage. The UN has the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The EU has a body of constitutional treaties. FIFA has a rule book. Corporations have charters, and universities have honor codes. What unites each of these is their shared ancestral bond in the written constitution. The written constitution. Constitutions can, of course, exist without a written constitution. But in our day, in our time, right now, we treat a written text of higher law as synonymous with constitutionalism. Written texts and the tradition of writtenness are central to our understanding of constitutionalism. And it makes sense because across the ages, humanity has developed a profound reverence for texts, for the primacy of written rules. From the very beginning, from the early legal codes of Mesopotamia to the Solonian Constitution, and from the tradition of the Hebrew Bible to the Quran, and from the great Magna Carta to the US Constitution, and to the most recent constitutions adopted just last year. Written rules ruled. And we can understand why. The written form is accessible, it's tangible, it invites the reader to take hold of the text as her own, and to engage with it in ways that inspire confidence and reassurance that the rules will be applied as written, precisely because they are written. This makes codified rules more meaningful and more compelling than even the grandest and most magical ideas and spoken promises. In his classic study of American government, Thomas Paine described the US Constitution as the political Bible of the state, as the glue that brought together disparate persons across the vast lands of America to form a nation of persons united under the country's higher law. And so all of this makes the written Constitution seem like the greatest advancement in modern liberal democracy, the crowning achievement for a modern state, and the very foundation for the rule of law in the countries of the world. But what if I told you that the written Constitution is not the reason why constitutionalism has taken root in the world? What if I told you that the written Constitution is not the greatest achievement in modern democratic self-governance? And what if I told you that a written Constitution is just an illusion? That's the subject of our discussion today on constitutionalism in the world. Take a moment to imagine your ideal constitution. What would it say in its text? It would probably celebrate democratic rights and liberties. It would promise equality and non-discrimination. It would guarantee free speech, permit free assembly, promise that you have the right to come and go in and out of the country as you choose. Your ideal constitution might recognize the right to education, the right to health care, the right to peace and safety. It would also give you the right to elect your representatives and to be elected yourself. This ideal constitution would, of course, also protect the free press and your right to religious freedom. This sounds like a modern, liberal, democratic constitution of an enlightened state. You might be thinking right now, perhaps, that yes, this sounds like a marvelous constitution. I would like to live in that country. Well, welcome to North Korea, because that is what is written in the text of the Constitution of North Korea, one of the world's most repressive and vicious and undemocratic regimes. And yet all of those rights and many more appear in the Constitution of North Korea. Constitutions do not always tell the truth. The problem, you see, goes back to the year 1789 at the creation of the US Constitution. The success of the United States as a country under its written constitution gave rise to a strong association between constitutions and democracy. And by the early 19th century, written constitutions became synonymous with democracy and with constitutionalism. They became interchangeable terms. That was the beginning of the problem. The problem is that this association between written constitutions and constitutionalism presented an opportunity for authoritarian leaders. They would write down democratic promises in their constitution, even if they had no intention of honoring those promises. But why? Why write a constitution and put into it promises that you do not intend to keep? The answer, I think, is clear. It's to exploit the positive identification that existed then and still today between a written constitution and the values of constitutionalism, namely democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. You see, authoritarian leaders conceal their true intentions behind a strategically drafted constitution that appears by its words to embrace the values of constitutionalism, but that in reality is only a facade. These constitutions are no more than a smokescreen. And so in many parts of the world today, we find a legal and political culture of written constitutions without the liberal democratic culture of constitutionalism. But this problem extends beyond authoritarian states. In every single country of the world, there is a gulf between the written constitution and the actual lived constitution, what we can call the real constitution. No regime successfully fulfills all of its written constitutional commitments. No country delivers on all of the promises that its constitution makes. But it's not always because of bad intentions. Let me give you some examples. There are archetypes of bills of rights in the world. And one in particular is what I want to call an aspirational Bill of Rights. This archetype codifies constitutional rights, the same ones that you might wish for yourselves. The rights to expression, to religious freedom, to equality, all of the ones that are associated with liberal democracy. But aspirational rights do not satisfy themselves with simple statements of citizen rights and freedoms. They try to do more. An aspirational Bill of Rights speaks broadly and boldly in ambitious language. It rejects the existing limitations of contemporary society as it is, and it instead reaches far into the future to imagine society as it could be. And so these aspirational bills of rights seek to transform society. They make a commitment to delivering social and economic rights to the people, the right to housing, the right to food, the right to minimum wage, to paid holidays, to free education. Rights that are intended to give every person a meaningful life of safety, stability, fulfillment, and affirmation as a whole person. We see these kinds of constitutions in Poland, in Uzbekistan, in Belarus, many countries of Eastern Europe, but of course in other parts of the world too. They paint a portrait of what is possible, of a good life, of a just society, and of a constitution that is committed to the people it serves. But these aspirational bills of rights are often just a list of unrealistic promises that cannot be fulfilled. Because some countries with these aspirational rights do not have the necessary funds to deliver on the promises that they make. If an aspirational Bill of Rights enshrines the right to a healthy environment, but the state does not have the funds to clean the environment, that right to a healthy environment might as well not be written in the Constitution because it is toothless. Consider the Constitution of Bolivia. Article 16 promises the right to food to all people. It's an admirable objective because it seeks to ensure that people in the country have proper nutrition. But according to the UN, 20% of Bolivians are undernourished. So you see, there is a disjunction here between what the Constitution says and how people live. Or consider the Constitution of Mexico. Article 123 declares that equal wages shall be paid for equal work, regardless of sex. But today in Mexico, the gender wage gap is 19%. The same phenomenon exists with environmental rights. In 2008, Ecuador inserted the rights of nature into its constitution. At the time, Ecuador ranked number 22 in the world on environmental health. That's pretty good. But by the year 2020, just last year, Ecuador had dropped to number 56 in the world. How does that happen? The Constitution says you have a right to a clean environment. You give rights of nature and you put those in the Constitution. But environmental quality declines. How can that be? Well, the message to me is clear. Beware the cult of constitutional codification. Constitutional promises mean nothing without political action because constitutions alone cannot guarantee rights. Political actors have to build political will, and they must exercise fiscal discipline to deliver on the promises that their constitution makes. Because when a constitution says something but means another, there are real costs involved. There's a real risk to an aspirational Bill of Rights because it risks evaporating from the Constitution all of its substantive force, and with it the hope of cultivating a people that abides by and respects the rule of law. Think about it. If a constitution promises the right to shelter, to food, and to a job, and if you walk down the street and you see a homeless person asking for money to eat or for help for themselves and their children, if they have no prospects for a job despite their best efforts, if people are starving, then those who have read the Constitution and then witnessed these disastrous social conditions, those people will come to no other conclusion but that the Constitution does not mean what it says. And the consequences can be severe for the rule of law in that country. for social cohesion in that country, and for the prospect of building a culture of constitutionalism. Those people will lose faith in the Constitution, and they'll doubt the power of government to improve their lives in the way the Constitution has promised. They will see the Constitution as little more than just a piece of paper. This mismatch between the constitutional text and constitutional reality is not limited to aspirational rights that promise social and economic rights. This mismatch is evident for all rights, civil rights, political rights, and human rights too. Most of us, I think, believe that it's a good idea to codify rights in the Constitution, that it's a good idea to put more rights into the Constitution, because the more rights, the better. The better for our lives, the better for democracy, the better for our country. But that view is incorrect. You may be surprised to learn that codifying rights in a constitution may not have much of an effect at all. You may be surprised to learn that writing down more rights in a constitution does not correlate with a better democracy. Having more rights in the Constitution does not necessarily lead to living a better life, does not necessarily lead to having a better, stronger democracy. Let me explain. If you examine all of the world's constitutions and you count the number of rights in each of them, you can generate a list of the top 10 constitutions in the world according to the number of rights that they have in their text. Number 1 in the world is Ecuador. Its constitution protects 99 rights. Number 10 is Brazil, and its constitution protects 79 rights. Who else is in the top 10? Mexico, Angola, Venezuela, Serbia, Armenia, Bolivia, Cape Verde, and Portugal. Those are the top 10 countries in the world for total rights in the Constitution. Here's the interesting point. None of those countries in the top 10 for rights, none of those countries ranks in the top 10 for most democratic countries in the world. Let me repeat that. No country in the top 10 for constitutional rights ranks in the top 10 for the quality of democracy. This is surprising, isn't it? Because one could reasonably expect a correlation between rights and democracy, but there is no correlation, let alone a causation between more constitutional rights and better democracy or better quality of life. And so the point here is that constitutions are not self-enforcing. If you want to protect rights, you must do more than simply write them down in the Constitution. Protecting rights requires political will, strong institutions, and respect for the rule of law. Let me surprise you with another fact. If you build a list of the world's top 10 worst violators of human rights, you will see that they codify more constitutional rights than some of the world's leading liberal democracies that do not protect many rights at all. So the world's worst violators of human rights are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, South Sudan, Somalia, North Korea, the Central African Republic, Chad, and Equatorial Guinea. Each of these human rights violators has a constitution, of course. And each of these constitutions promises more rights than so many of the world's leading liberal democracies, including Australia, France, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And so the point by now should be clear. You cannot believe everything you read in a constitution. And so it's not uncommon for authoritarian regimes to conceal their evil aims behind a constitution that appears to be democratic, but in reality is only a facade. So far, we've been discussing the limits of written constitutions. I've been showing you that the idea of a written constitution is really an illusion, because no constitution is ever fully written. And often what constitutions say in their text does not really reflect the lived reality of the people who live under that constitution. There's another reason why a written constitution is just an illusion, because sometimes written constitutions change in ways that are not reflected in the text of the Constitution. In other words, the authoritative legal meaning of the Constitution changes, but the words of the Constitution remain the same. So think back to the US Constitution, which I began our time together with. Even that constitution is not an exhaustive list of its own rules and rights, the world's first codified constitution. Because much of what we know and understand as the Constitution of the US exists outside of the text of the Constitution. For example, the US Constitution has a contracts clause that expressly prohibits states from impairing the obligation of contracts. And yet today, it's lawful, it's permissible for states to intervene into contract with good reason. The US Supreme Court approved this practice during the Great Depression as an emergency measure. But since then, states have continued to act in direct conflict with the contract clause. This is an example of a contradiction between a written rule in the Constitution and an accepted practice. You see here, the practice contradicts the written Constitution, and yet the practice is accepted as constitutional. This brings us to an inescapable reality of modern constitutionalism, which is that constitutions are never fully written. Not only because rules of law sometimes exist outside of the written constitution, but also because sometimes the rules of law contradict the rules that are written in the Constitution. Now, there's another area of constitutional law, I think, that shows us why constitutions are not fully written, because they cannot be fully written. Because in the end, a written constitution is just an illusion. And that area of constitutional law is constitutional amendment. No part of any constitution, I think, is more important than the rules of constitutional amendment. Amendment rules tell us who can amend the Constitution, when they can amend it, how they must amend it, and whether anything in the Constitution is unamendable. For example, the Constitution of France says that republicanism and the territorial integrity of the state shall be unamendable. Brazil makes federalism and fundamental rights unamendable. Germany makes human dignity unamendable. And Indonesia makes the unitary form of the state unamendable. The point here is that some constitutions state expressly that this or that is unamendable, but not the Indian constitution. In India, the constitution is clear when it says that the national legislature has the power to amend the constitution however it wishes. There are no prohibitions written in the text of the constitution about what is amendable and what is not. Anything in India is amendable because everything is amendable. At least that is what the text of the Constitution tells us. But this is another example where the written Constitution does not reflect the real Constitution, because the Indian Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to mean something different from what the text says. The text says there are no limits on what can be amended, but the court has rejected this purely textual reading of the Constitution. The court has said that the Constitution must always retain its basic structure. This basic structure of the Constitution, says the court, cannot be amended. And so this raises a puzzle, because the Constitution does not identify what forms part of the basic structure of the Constitution. It is the court that tells us what constitutes this basic structure. And the court has used this idea to say that some constitutional amendments in India are unconstitutional because they violate the basic structure of the Constitution. This, you see, is an unwritten limit on the power of amendment in India, a power the Constitution tells us is unlimited. So this is another difference between the text of the Constitution as written and the text of the Constitution as lived. A very similar problem is evident in many other countries of the world. Of course, all constitutions have to be interpreted. They have to be enforced. But constitutions are not self-executing. So for example, if you have a constitutional rule that says everyone is equal, well, the interpreter of the Constitution must tell us what that equality means in specific contexts. Because constitutions do not enumerate a resolution for every conceivable conflict that might arise under this principle of equality. Now, that is different, however, from what you and I have been discussing so far. We've been discussing cases where the constitutional text is ineffective in achieving its purpose, its written purpose. We've been discussing cases where the constitutional text has been interpreted to mean the very opposite of what it says. And we've been discussing cases where the interpreter of the Constitution has defied the very meaning of the constitutional text. These are serious problems for constitutional democracy, serious problems rooted in the written Constitution. These problems are ubiquitous in the world. No matter the country, no matter the region, these problems appear everywhere. And they appear everywhere because a written Constitution is just an illusion. So where does this leave us? I think it leaves us with many questions. Has the written Constitution lived up to its promise? Has it delivered the public goods we imagined it would? Has it successfully regulated the exercise of public power? And has it managed to protect rights, human rights, civil rights, political rights? We can ask the question in a different way. Is modern constitutionalism stronger today, better today, because of the written Constitution? I think the answer is complicated. In some ways, the answer is certainly yes, insofar as constitutionalism is rooted in the democratic values of the rule of law. The written Constitution marks a giant leap forward for fairness, predictability, and notice. But in other ways, the written Constitution has made it possible for political actors to do great harm to the principles of constitutionalism, because the advent of the written Constitution has spawned a troubling form of constitutionalism, a form of constitutionalism that threatens to become more of a cult of constitutionalism. So what can we do to protect the integrity of the written Constitution? My written Constitution, your written Constitution in Indonesia. Welcome back to our discussion of the different types of bills of rights. I described to you an aspirational bill of rights, one that promises rights but does not always deliver. There's an alternative model that may be better for the integrity of the written Constitution. Some countries have what we can call a pragmatic Bill of Rights. This kind of Bill of Rights recognizes that the state has an important role in improving the lives of its people. But a pragmatic Bill of Rights recognizes that the state may not always have the money needed to fulfill that mandate. And it also recognizes that the choices made in how to allocate limited public funds may be a non-justiciable matter. And so the result is that a pragmatic Bill of Rights requires a state to do what is within its capacity to move progressively toward delivering social and economic rights for all of its people, like the right to housing, to food, to healthcare, to a clean environment, just to name a few examples. These rights and privileges are forward-looking directives of social policy that are intended to guide policymakers in their choices. But their choices about how to achieve this progressive realization of social and economic rights and about how fast to get there, those choices are not ordinarily justiciable, meaning that they cannot be enforced in a court. And we see this kind of a pragmatic Bill of Rights with some variations in India, in Ireland, and in South Africa and elsewhere. I think this model of constitutional rights has many virtues. It has a high ambition for delivering rights to the people. It inspires hope that the country will one day reach its full promise of liberty and social progress. But it keeps those high ambitions in the sphere of political reality and of political possibility. It encourages political actors to do what is possible and what is achievable, not to overpromise and underdeliver. And so in my view, the result is positive from the perspective of the written Constitution, because this written Constitution with this pragmatic Bill of Rights creates manageable expectations about what the state can do and how quickly it can achieve the transformative objectives of bringing social and economic security to the people. That's one way to narrow the gulf between the Constitution as it is written and the Constitution as it is lived. That should be a goal for a written Constitution, to keep the gulf as narrow as possible. The great legal theorist Lon Fuller explains that the rule of law requires a legal system to respect a number of criteria. And if you don't respect these criteria, you do not respect the rule of law. One key criterion for the rule of law, according to Fuller, is congruence between the rules as announced and their actual administration. In other words, the rules on the books should, as much as possible, match the rules in practice. What is written in the Constitution must reflect how the Constitution is applied, how it is enforced, because otherwise there is a discordance that leads to confusion and the possibility of arbitrary state conduct. Now, of course, no written Constitution perfectly reflects the real Constitution. All constitutions have a gulf that separates the actual Constitution from the written Constitution. But you see, the gulf risks getting larger and larger the longer a Constitution lives and the longer it endures. Because the longer a Constitution has endured, the more it has been interpreted, the more it has been amended, and the more it has changed in ways that are not visible to those who read the text. This brings us to something else that can be done to strengthen the integrity of the written Constitution and to ensure as much as possible that the written Constitution actually is the real Constitution. And that is to rewrite constitutions periodically. The older a constitution is, the less likely it is to reflect the values of the present generation. Constitutional amendment is usually hard, and often old and outdated rules remain codified in the constitutional text. The US Constitution is a perfect example. It is the world's oldest written constitution. Its text protects rights and liberties in lofty, noble terms, but its text also includes language that undermines this promise of equality that it explains and declares and proclaims in its text. The text of the US Constitution still today contains gendered and racist words that have no place in any modern society. Consider the 14th Amendment. It guarantees that no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. And yet, the Constitution of the United States still today mentions slavery in reference to African Americans, counting not as full persons, but as only 3/5 of a person. Or consider the 13th Amendment. It abolishes slavery, but the Fugitive Slave Clause, which requires escaped persons to be returned to their masters, that remains in the Constitution today. It remains as a painful reminder of America's original sin. The Constitution also has outdated language on gender. Today, still today, the text tells us that men alone can be president, referring only to he or his or him when speaking of the presidency. Of course, women today can and do run for president. But imagine how people must feel. Think of school children, for example, when they read the Constitution in their basic civics course. Some will be made to feel less than welcome in their own country. Others may wonder why some of their classmates are singled out for unjust treatment. But all of them will internalize that the highest law of the land creates a hierarchy of personhood. And there is no place for that in any modern country today. This is a problem with written constitutions that are hard to amend even to do the right thing, like in the United States, to remove references to slavery and to speak of women and men on equal terms. It's hard to do in the US today because the Constitution is so hard to amend, which means that the US Constitution is replete with obsolete and outdated language that weakens rather than enhances the feeling of belonging that a constitution should generate among its people. That is why I suggest that constitutions should be rewritten periodically in order to ensure that the text represents the current values of the time and the vision that the people have for themselves. Rewriting constitutions will also help to keep as narrow as possible the inevitable gulf that grows over time between the Constitution as written and the Constitution as lived. In our time together, I have been highlighting how written constitutions have failed to live up to their promise. But I want to make one thing clear. I believe in written constitutions, and I believe that all states should have them. There are things that only written texts can do. Let me give you some examples. A written text, a written constitution, carries a profound moral force. It enshrines a tangible, touchable, readable charter of principles, principles that define a community and that connect disparate persons to each other, united in common cause for the betterment of themselves and of their posterity. At its best, at its very best, a written constitution can become more than just a place to locate the rules of law. It can become a powerful symbol of nationhood and of identity. We might think that writing down a constitution would entail freezing time at the moment of the founding design, but that would be wrong. Because a properly operational written constitution always offers a way to update the text, to keep it current, to allow political actors and the people to make sure that the text is congruent with reality. And when a written constitution operates correctly in this way, that constitution then becomes more than just a text. It becomes a window into the soul of the people. And so it is not servitude to bind yourself, ourselves, to written rules. It is salvation to know what is law, to know what is not, and to have the power as a people to adapt the Constitution to the times and to our needs. And so Aristotle was right when he wrote long ago that the community is the Constitution. The community is the Constitution. Let me now close with just a few remarks. The written Constitution is an illusion, and it always will be an illusion because no Constitution can ever be completely written. Yet the written Constitution is the greatest advancement in modern government, perhaps in the history of democracy. And we must honor that legacy by striving always to keep the constitutional text aligned with the values and the needs of the people for whom the Constitution was written. Thank you so very much for your time and your interest. I look forward to our discussion. I welcome questions from you.
Okay, thank you, Richard, for a very important lecture about constitutionalism. So shall I open the Q&A session? I believe that all of our students is excited with the topic. I know I have Kalila here and Aura. Maybe you have a question, please. Okay, I see one raised hand here. Two raised hand here. Okay, we want to take two questions first. Please open your microphone and direct to your question. maybe the host can help to unmute the microphone of the participant who want to ask. Cecito Fatima, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the time and given to me. And now I want to ask. I am studying in Airlangga University, and especially international law of law. And now I want to ask, because I am studying especially international law today, I want to ask about international law relates to the constitution in a country. Now, what if one of the content of an international agreement is again the country constitution? Whatever the state will continue to participate in the agreement or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cecito. Richard, you want to respond directly, or we expect another question, and then you want to respond?
I'm happy to respond. I believe,
Okay.
Professor Rosa, the question was, what if a country violates international law? Is that right? What happens?
Cecito, your question is about what if the Constitution violate international law? Is that correct?
Oh, that was it. Yes, that was it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. What if the Constitution violates international law? Well, this is a question that is becoming. This is a question that's becoming increasingly important, especially in the context of constitution making. As some of you may know, we now see around the world courts invalidating constitutional amendments. So sometimes you have a constitution like the Constitution of Indonesia that says this is unamendable. And then political actors amend the constitution in a way that involves this unamendable rule. And a court says this amendment is unconstitutional because you violated the unamendable rule. Okay. There's also circumstances where courts will invalidate an amendment where there is nothing unamendable in the text of the Constitution. So courts interpret the Constitution as making things implicitly unamendable. Good. Now, what about the process of making a new Constitution? Is it possible that the process itself could violate some norms or understandings or maybe even rules at the multilateral, multinational level? And is it possible for the content of the Constitution, not the process by which it's made now, the actual content, the rules, the provisions in the Constitution, is it possible that they violate some multinational, regional, supranational rules? Very interesting question. Imagine the answer is yes. Imagine a new Constitution violates some supranational charter of rights. What happens then? Two possibilities occur to me. One possibility is that that country's own constitutional court would say, you cannot make this constitution the way you propose to make it because it violates this supranational rule in a charter to which we are signatory. The second possibility is that a supranational body would say that that constitution cannot be made because it violates this supranational rule. Now, there have been instances in which we've seen a constitutional amendment invalidated or at least declared to be incompatible with the Constitution because it violated a supranational norm or law or rule. This happened in Nicaragua. This happened in Togo. But we haven't yet seen an example of a constitution itself being held to violate an international law. It's an interesting question, which is why about 10 years ago or thereabouts, there was a big conference organized by the president of Tunisia. And the president of Tunisia gathered scholars and political actors together for a conference to discuss the creation of an international constitutional court. And what was proposed at that meeting was to design this supranational body that would oversee the constitutional activity of countries around the world. And so this responds directly to the question from Zezito, who asks about the unconstitutionality of a constitution when measured against international law, because this international constitutional court could have enforced both domestic constitutional law against the constitutional actors and enforced international law against the domestic constitutional actors. It would have been a very, very powerful court. Now, of course, that court was not created because it raises many problems with regard to sovereignty, with regards to the composition of the court, how it will work, who will be members to it. But the point, I think, is a larger one, which is the one raised by Zezito, which is, can a constitution violate international law? And if yes, what happens? Well, people are now thinking about this, and perhaps, Zezito, you are going to write something about this. And if you do, I'd love to read it.
Thank you. I hope that answer your question, yes, Zezito. Richard, we have one question in the chat box. So I will read the question. The question from Eduardo Saratonga. So he said that, good morning, Professor Richard. I would like to give a few questions. Does international constitutionalism need democracy? That's the first question. And then the second question is the democracy is the answer to the incompleteness, shortcomings, and paradoxical effect of international constitutionalism? So I think both participants are interested in the field of intersection between constitution and international law. Yeah, that's a good
yes.
idea, I think.
Yes, they're both interested in that intersection, and with good reason, because it's a fertile ground for more research. And so I encourage both of them and others to write on this subject, because a lot of people are asking these questions, but we just don't have good answers yet. So please do write, and I would love to read them, your papers and your works. So the question is, does international law require democracy? So imagine you have, as we do now, this global community of states. Does the integrity of international law require respect for democracy and democratic values? I think the answer is yes, but that doesn't solve our problem, because our problem is to define what democracy demands, what democracy requires. It's very easy to say, yes, the integrity of the international community requires democracy, but that doesn't answer the question. What does democracy itself require? Does it require simply free and fair elections, and that's it? Does it require something less, maybe just elections, whether they're free or fair? Or does it require much more? Does democracy require free and fair elections, rights and liberties, and not just negative rights, but also positive rights? These, I think, are important questions that have yet to be resolved. Now, what we see today in the world is that the international community of states includes both democratic states and non-democratic states, even anti-democratic states. And so we see that it is possible to have an international community of states that includes countries that do not respect democracy. But the question is it working? Is it working well? And I think the answer is no. The answer is no. Things would work a lot better if there were a shared set of values around which the community of states could gather to help address the problems of the world. But that is not what we have. And so here's an alternative. Here's an alternative. Perhaps instead of thinking about the international community of states, the global community of states, where defining democracy might be difficult, perhaps impossible, in a way that all countries can agree to, no matter what region of the world they come from. What about having regional understandings of democracy? Imagine, do you think that it's likely that there's a shared understanding of what democracy requires among the countries of South America? Maybe. It's probably right that Brazil agrees with Chile, and they agree with Colombia, and they agree with Argentina. Probably there's a shared understanding of what democracy requires. Do you think that it's possible that there's a shared understanding of what is required for democracy among, let's say, Kenya and Senegal and Ethiopia? Perhaps. What about a shared understanding of democracy among Ireland and France and Germany? Perhaps. And there we have a test. We have a test case, because that is what the European Union does. Yes? It's an effort to create a shared understanding of how we do governance, how we do democratic governance. So I think to answer the question, we should take it in smaller bites. Let's think instead of regional understandings of democracy first, and then maybe think about more global understandings of democracy, because it'll be easier to achieve the former than it is to achieve the latter.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I see we have one raised hand before we ending the session. Is there still any question? Because unfortunately, the time is already 10 o'clock here, and I believe that it's... Oh, Radian has a question.
Yes, of course,
Please.
Professor Radian, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Rosa. Professor Richard, your first opening said that Constitution is just illusion. Then it makes me pessimistic on written Constitution, especially also in our country. And you can see that agenda of amendment or constitutional reform is always elite political agenda setting. So this is not coming from grassroots, not from coming to the society. So the agenda of constitutional reform is always about the power among a state organ. My question is, how is then the future of or possibility of a plebiscite or referendum? Maybe you may compare which one is better in terms of life of constitutionalism, a country equipped with referendum or a plebiscite, or a country equipped with amendment in the hand of the political actor. Thank you.
I absolutely love this question, because it's such an important question. It goes to the different sociological traditions in the countries of the world. What I mean by that is referendums, the idea of popular sovereignty, power residing with the people, that is something that resonates in some countries, but not in others. So there is a built-in tradition already in some countries toward popular exercises of authority that other countries reject. Let me give you an example. France. France is a country that embraces the idea of the referendum because they believe very much in power residing in the hands of the people. But this is not the case in all countries of the world. And so for me, this raises a question: why? Why is it the case that referendums are such a powerful vehicle, compelling vehicle in one country, but not in another? The answer, I think, has to do with where the country locates the source of its legitimacy. In some countries, it's the people. In others, it's not. Perhaps monarchy, perhaps some countries have religious commitments, perhaps some countries have secular commitments, perhaps some countries are the product of elite bargains, as you say, perhaps some countries, it just depends on where you locate the root of legitimacy. Now, having said that, your question about whether one kind of a country, let's say a country that does deploy referendums frequently, whether that kind of a country has been more successful than other kinds of countries that don't use referendum. Well, let's think of the countries where referendums are common. Switzerland, France, just two examples of countries where referendums are held quite regularly with great success. Ireland is another country. Now, these countries have built up an infrastructure to support the holding of referendums, which means that when these referendums are held, there are campaigns that operate on parallel track to inform voters about what they're voting on. And so it's not just we're going to hold a referendum and then go vote the next day. No, it's we're going to hold a referendum. Here's a public education campaign. Here's how you can learn more about the question on the ballot. And then you go vote. It's an informed vote. And I think, Professor Radian, I think that countries that find ways to engage their people in these kinds of public forums and invite them in public deliberation, I think those countries are strongest. Because those countries have at their very base the people as participants in the project of nation building. So it is not an elite decision, always and exclusively. It's a decision that, of course, involves the elite, involves those who we elect to represent us. But they choose to involve the people, and that makes the country stronger, I think. Now, it requires some work to build that culture. You can't just develop it overnight. You have to build it over time so that the people come to trust the elected representatives, and the elected representatives come to trust that the people will do the work necessary to make an informed vote when they're given the opportunity to make those important decisions on questions of constitutional governance. So my own personal view is that the more we can include the people in deciding matters about their constitution, the better. That's my own view. And I root my view in the idea of sociological legitimacy, that legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed, and that consent being given in an informed way. So I very much hope that countries take that invitation to find new ways to involve their people in making these big decisions that have to do with the Constitution and with their own democracy.
Thank you so much. I think I have to say that that was the last question because we are now 10 o'clock here. And thank you again for Professor Richard Albert for a very important and interesting topic on constitutionalism in the world. And yeah, I know that there are still so many questions from our students, but maybe we can continue in other upcoming agenda because Professor Richard Albert is right now a visiting professor in the Graduate School of Universitas Airlangga. So it is always an honor to have you, Richard, and I will surely see you again in our upcoming agenda. And for the participant, thank you very much for your attention. And for further information about our agenda and our program, please visit our website and Instagram at Pascasarjana UNER. And yeah, I wish that this public lecture will be the starting lecture for our upcoming agenda. Thank you so much, Richard. Have a good rest, I think. Good
Yes.
night. and have a good day for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This has been wonderful, and I want to make sure that I recognize all of the attendees for their time and their interest. And also, I want to make sure that I express my sincere thanks to the director for being here, but also to Professor Radian and Professor Rosa for this wonderful invitation. I have many projects ongoing with Professors Radian and Rosa. We're writing something together, and we have many projects ahead. So this is just another opportunity for us to see each other among many others in the future. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. Have a good night there, and have a good day for everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Richard. Thank you so much.
agenda lanjutan dari Pascasarjana. Hari Kamis tanggal 25 akan ada kuliah tamu, kuliah perdana dari Prodi Magister Sains Hukum dan Pembangunan, ya. Dan silahkan ikuti info-infonya di website Pascasarjana dan juga di IG. Terima kasih atas segala perhatiannya.